Hello, Edgar Fernandez from Pharma-Chemical Safety, located in Brantford, Ontario. The topic of today is combustible powder basic principles. We help companies to protect people's lives by reducing incidents drastically through my efficient methodology. So it's a very own and particular methodology that we create in pharmaceutical safety. So I have 23 years of experience in process and occupational safety areas in the pharmaceutical, manufacturing, oil and gas industries. Currently, I hold the professional engineer designation in Ontario and Alberta, Canada. I hold the CRSP in Canada and the CSP in the United States, and I hold a bachelor degree in chemical engineering. So the very basic definition of combustible powders is if the combustible dust, that is any fine material that has an ability to catch fire and explode when it's mixed with air. That's when these type of materials become so dangerous, and that is the essential definition. These combustible powders could be any solid organic material such as the sugar, flour, grain, wood, cinnamon, uh, many metals such as zinc, aluminum, on some non-metallic inorganic materials. Those materials normally they are not combustible in the staging stage. That means when they are on the super sack and nothing is happening. It's when they become in contact with the air is when these materials can burn or can explode. And as you can see, here I have three technical definitions from different government agencies. One is from OSHA, one is from Canada, the one is 2015, that is under the GHS Global Harmonized System. So this system defines perfectly what's combustible powder. And the Alberta OHS Acts and Regulation. And the three of them, they have something in common. That's we saw in the very basic definition. It's a finely divided material that is becomes in contact with air, and if we have the right amount. That's the very basic the definition of combustible powder. Some like NFPA they add more technical words, but at the end is the same. Become in contact with air, and if you have the right amount, you might have a deflagration at the end. The risk of explosion due to a combustible powder can be found in different industries. On grain, like the food industry or the agricultural industry, such as grain elevators, or during the food production. On the chemical or pharmaceutical industry, when you produce APIs, for example, or you produce rubber, plastics. On the woodworking facilities, so the wood powder is very combustible. Metal processing, such as zinc, magnesium, aluminum. Recycling facilities, the same, paper, plastic, metals. So those powders they can be combustible as well, or coal-fired power plants. And the dust are created when the material are transported, handled, processed, polished, ground, or shaped. But also there are other processes that can create dust. When you can create it by abrasive, blasting, cutting, crushing, mixing, sifting, or screening the dry material. And then the build-off of this dried residue from the processing of wet materials can also generate dust. So this dust comes in contact with the air, and that's when you can have this type of explosions. Normally they call deflagrations. That's the right name to call it. And essentially, any workplace that generates dust is potentially at risk. And that's the thing that we're going to talk in this series of videos, how identify this type of hazards and the risks as well. So in combustible powders, we have something that we call the Pentagon. So it's the fire triangle, but we need to add two more sides. So we have ignition, fuel, and oxygen could be the triangle, but also we add dispersion and confinement, and that makes the pentagon of combustible ducts deflagrations. So you have the ignition source that can be heat or static. You have the oxygen. Oxygen, it's something that needs to be measured, and any combustible that has a parameter that we call a limit oxygen concentration, LOC. If you exceed that limit of oxygen concentration, you have a potential to have a deflagration. You have the fuel, that is a combustible powder, but the combustible powder also has another parameter they call minimum ignition concentration, MIC. So I'm gonna talk later, I'm gonna talk in future videos in more detail with those parameters. You have the dispersion that is flying through the air, and then you have a primary and secondary explosions. The same I'm gonna talk in future videos about these two type of explosions. And then you do have the confinement. This could be a mixer tank, could be a grain elevator, many type of a dryer, for example. So we're going to talk about those type of equipments as well, and how it need to be designed from the safety standpoint of view, from the process safety standpoint of view. This short video was a very an introductory of combustible powders, very basic, but like it's difficult to cover this topic, combustible dust, in one video. It could be so long, so it's better to split the topic and explain in detail some of the aspects that we need to be aware, and then we need to know very well when we handle combustible powders. There are some regulations that we're going to talk about, like such as NFPA 654, 68, 69. Canada has the provincial fire codes. So in the States you have the national fire code, the same in Canada. So we're going to talk about also of these codes and standards and regulations, and then the NFPA also, there is a new standard that was created by the NFPA, how to set up your combustible powder management program. You want to talk more about this video or you have doubts regarding on combustible powders, you can contact me. You have my phone number, 613-464-0562. This is the area code. It's in Canada. You can find me on Facebook on / Pharma-Chemical Safety, on Twitter, Pharma-Chemical Safety 1, or my webpage, that is pharmachemicalsafety.com. Thank you very much, guys, and see you on the next video. I'm going to talk about deflagration, the definition of deflagration. I'm going to start talking about the parameters that is going to tell you how combustible your powder is. There are different classifications on powders depending on those parameters as well. So I want to start talking about that on that, and later on more videos I'm going to start talking about dryers, about mixing, about grain elevators, about housekeeping, because all these type of aspects are defined and are regulated on different codes, standards, and regulations. Thank you very much, and see you on the next video. Bye.